Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Welcome back. Um, I think for the second session, the premise is very simple, right? Big tech is happening. It's here. It's really bad. Um, I think we've talked about this year in and year out. We've proposed solutions, and I think now the stage and the scale and the speed at which, let's say, big tech companies like OpenAI, but even governmental institutions like the EU are operating on the premise that bigger is better, that faster, more efficient is exactly what we need, and it's a race. So we're not even thinking about what kind of footprint ecologically, socially that is happening. One of the bigger, better movements that are glimmers of hope is more the slow tech movement. And I think our first speaker here is really engaged with the topic. Carolyn Strauß is the editor of the Slow Technology Reader. And to me, that is a super valuable resource and I think a reference for this kind of technology. So she will get to talk about it. It basically gathers contributions from diverse disciplinary fields and knowledge traditions to consider technology through a slow lens. And I think it is such a nice concept, slow technology. But I think if you really think about it, it would ideally evoke a little bit of discomfort because we are so hooked, I think, on the speed of delivery that big tech gives us. And to engage with slow tech, although it is a radical necessity, it is also means we give up some of the conveniences of the technology that we currently have. So to introduce our first speaker, Carolyn Strauß is an American, Amsterdam-based, researcher, curator, and creative facilitator whose work traverses fields of architecture, design, contemporary art, emerging technology, and social and environmental activism. Big round of applause for Carolyn.
Thank you so much. I'm also an American, almost embarrassing to say at this point. It's been embarrassing for quite a while, but anyway, I won't get into that. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Thank you to welcome everyone. Happy full moon, almost. And thank you to the Fiber team for inviting me and for recognizing, of course, the relevance of slowness to the theme of this year's festival and above all to the current and ongoing, it seems, technological moment. Yeah. Oh, I've got a clicker. I open with these two quotations because for me they speak directly to where we are right now, what is at stake, and also what is possible. The first echoes loudly in the present. This is from Filippo Marinetti's Futurist Manifesto from 1909. And, you know, the DNA of the tech bros is running through it, right? It's reminding us of what's wrong with many of today's technological systems. And then the second one, move slow and heal things. It reminds us that another approach is available to us, one that is essential to our well-being and I would say even to our very survival. See if this works. Yes. And the latter, of course, imperative is what this talk is about today. I suspect I was primarily invited because of this book, which the Slow Technology Reader, which was published late last year by Faliz. It's the third in a series of slow readers. And each one, as Abdus said, brings together diverse disciplinary perspectives. In this case, looking at technology through the lens of various practices. The ideas and practices of this book are the focus of my talk today, practices shared in this book, but through it runs 2 decades of research, inquiry, and experimentation at Slow Research Lab, which is the platform, as he mentioned, that I have been directing, and a transdisciplinary platform, research and curatorial platform that I started in New York and I brought to eventually to the Netherlands, which is where I'm based. So the session has been given the title Slowing Down Fast Tech. I want to make sure I have the, and by slow, although of course the allure of this idea of deceleration is very much there, and that is indeed part of it. Slowness does not merely mean, it's not merely a register of pace. It's actually about cultivating greater awareness of the complex relations in which we're embedded. It's about thinking across space, across time, across geographies, across ecologies, across different and diverse bodies. And Slow Research Lab is a place, this is just going to keep running a little bit, and maybe as you're watching it and as you're listening to me, just kind of see where your eyes alight and what catches your attention. There is, this copy is from the bookshop outside, so apparently there's one left. They also carry them at Athenaeum Book Center and at Sans Serif, both within close walking distance, if you're interested. Yeah, but Slow Research Lab is a place where writers and artists and thinkers and activists and researchers from diverse fields are exploring these expanded ways of thinking, sensing, knowing, relating, being, actually. And slowness for me includes training our awareness on tempos and temporalities that go beyond the narrow rhythms that are that the dominant fast world seem to impose on us or would like to impose on us. It means calling attention to broader social and material relations we're part of, and within which, of course, a variety of technologies operate, and again, across space and also across time. I'm going to keep returning to those two things. And in terms of the topic at hand, this idea of slowing down tech, this book is about imagining technology otherwise, shaped by a multiplicity of voices, of a multiplicity of embodiments, cosmologies, and diverse forms of intelligence, if we even know what that is. And of course, these days, maybe it goes without saying, when we hear the word technology, we think primarily about the digital, we think about AI, we think about platforms, devices, algorithms, data infrastructures, but part of the work at slow research and artifacts of research, such as this book, is reminding us that digital technologies are only a tiny fraction of the technologies that humans live with and among and alongside. And every day we use language, we put on clothing, we follow recipes and cook food. Many of us rode our bicycles to get here today. So this idea that the digital has taken over this word technology is in itself representative of something. And but also, and a lot of the technological innovation of those things I just mentioned, those everyday things goes back millennia, and some of those ancient histories are described and are present in this book. But also, techniques of voicing are a technology. Techniques of healing are a technology. The practices of listening are a technology. Dance is a technology. Mourning is a technology. There are 3 pieces in the book about mourning through different perspectives, and mourning being the active process of metabolizing grief, of which there is so much. There is so much in our world today on a personal scale, on a collective scale, on a planetary scale, so much to grieve. And mourning is a technology that actually we all need to be employing a lot more. So once we widen the frame of what technology is, then different futures begin to come into view. So obviously, there's a certain tension between what I do at Slow Research Lab and my life, our life, the lives that we share, right? Because even as I critique technological systems, I remain like deeply involved with them, right? I touch on this at the beginning of my introduction to the book, where I'm just reflecting on sitting at my table with a cup of coffee and at my laptop writing, and I'm thinking about all of the technologies that are converging in that moment. The flame on my stove when I'm lighting, when I'm on the coffee pot and so on. And all of these are like the networks that are going to carry my words out across town to my editor and so on, the massive server farms that are backing all of this up. This is happening also today with all of this technology that's before us. So each and every one of these is entangled with extraction, with exploited labor, with fossil fuels, with colonial histories, systems of logistics operating on a planetary stage. And I note also in my introduction that even as I'm writing about those things, I'm using words like my coffee, my table, like I'm using this vocabulary of possession that is directly linked to dispossession historically. And language, of course, is a technology. We use it every day. Then there's the materiality of it all, like that our digital lives appear frictionless, but of course they are profoundly material. The cloud is material, AI is material, data is material. These systems depend on mines, on cables, on shipping routes, on factories, servers, an enormous accumulation of capital that's built on those very histories of dispossession that I was just referring to. And they leave in their wake exhausted bodies, they leave poisoned landscapes. Rob Nixon called this slow violence. It's a term that's referring to the violence that's inflicted upon communities and on lands long after the time when the prospectors for whatever mineral or whatever project have long moved on, and the ongoing effects of those, the deteriorating effects of those. So, yeah, I also wanted to say it's something else I write in my introduction. Sorry, we're still on. The entanglements are not, all of these are not also somehow just out there. They're also in here. They're part of us. I make reference to Daisy Hilliard's book, The Second Body, where she refers to the fact that all of these, what's happening out there, the energy that's being extracted for the server that's running this machine or this machine, all of these are part of my body. It's my second body. I have accountability also to that body. I need to bring awareness also to that body. And I had just made a note as well. I think it's important to remember that most large-scale technological systems, AI systems today, they're shaped by venture capital, platform economies, military partnerships, and very narrow concentrations of power that influence what counts as intelligence, what counts as usefulness, what counts as efficiency, as safety, as progress, right? Let me get a new slide. Where's my clicker? Yes. Oh, nay. Okay. But our platform, which includes this book, Slow Research Lab, it's challenging the assumption that these systems and the logics underlying them are inevitable, or that, as the tech bros would like us to believe, that this is the only way forward in terms of digital technologies. And in the book, I adopt this phrase from the feminist film scholar Barbara Zecki, filling feeling. It's from a paper she wrote and a short film she made called Filling Feeling, the Archival Void. And with this phrase, she's calling upon us to do this crucial work of addressing the gaps that are in archives, in libraries, in historical records, and to fill them in with missing data, with missing voices, perspectives, embodiments, epistemologies. Now, I do want to go back to something Dina said, or maybe we can talk about that in the discussion, and we write about that also in the book, me and others, about the fact that not all knowledge should be so-called transparent. Not all knowledge has been earned. So a lot of the kind of, there's a tension also between how you fill in these gaps and how you create sort of enough robust data within these, for training these machines, and at the same time preserving not only the dignity but the sacredness of some information and knowledge and practices. So, but I wanted to just read something that I wrote in the book. That's why I have the book up here. About Barbara Zecki's Filling Feeling, which again is about asking who and what is missing, which non-dominant or non-monetizable voices and bodies and perspectives, including the non-human ones, could be shaping these digital technologies that are proliferating in our midst and reaching increasingly deeper and deeper into our lives. So on page 26, I wrote, at the same time, filling feeling is an incitement to feel into what is missing, casting our imagination as well as our hearts into those spaces, reaching toward the warmth of missing bodies, listening attentively and patiently for the soundings of those whose voices and stories have been suppressed or overlooked, carefully sensing our way into a more inclusive, radically affectionate future. Through filling feeling, we begin to access more complex textures of and relationship with digital technology, conjuring alternative, slow futures in which a fuller cast of characters has infiltrated the old scripts. New coordinates are superimposed on the old maps, and libraries of data from which digital systems formulate their view of the world have become annotated with an impasto of fresh impulses, thoughts, and experiences. As such, our technologies can become loci of what contributor Rolando Vázquez Melkin elsewhere has called radical remembering, which he described as a form of relating to time that can bring radical change, not preserving the status quo of the dominant power, but healing, safeguarding the possibility of continuing to exist and to create alternative worlds. The majority of the contributors to this book are artists. Filling feeling is a job for all of us, if you subscribe to that. At its Slow Research Lab, we in particular are looking at creative thinking and practice. And it's because artists don't shy away from ambiguity, they don't shy away from uncertainty, they experiment, they lean into forms of knowing that resist or that exceed quantification. They're not afraid of the unknown. And there's a section of the book about trembling, which derives from the philosopher Edouard Glissant, the Maestro Glissant, as I like to call him, and his idea of trembling thinking, that is through the unknown, actually, that we tremble with one another. The unknown being this vast field of potentiality and also of connection. So importantly, before I'm going to get into just a few of the contributions and show some images to keep you entertained. I just want to emphasize that this book in no way is meant to trying to kind of conclusively say what slow technology is. The desire that I had and the impetus for this book is to kind of offer a set of new orientations, a set of new data points, as you will. The subtitle of the book is A Tool for Shaping Divergent Futures. And we do see it as a tool, and I also see it as a kind of an invitation also for you to find, for the reader, to enter into a dialogue and to be inspired to seek out other sources. So anyway, so the book imagines technologies that are grounded not in extraction, but in relation. And in this case, it's a little bit of both, because Elizabeth Raymond Eli invites us to turn our attention to the minerals that are embedded in our digital devices, to try to find both mental and embodied ways to connect with them. This image is from actually a lecture they gave to a course I was leading at the KBK a few months ago. I'm going to talk about that a bit later because I promised myself in the interest of time not to say too much. But it's an invitation to resonate with the frequencies of and the temporalities, to time travel with the minerals that are actually held in this device. But the embodied ways that she invites also have to do with visualizing and having a kind of a tangible understanding of like the toxic sludge, the volume of toxic sludge that is the result of this phone being created. Yeah, is this the right? Oh, yes, sorry. Technologies that move beyond capitalist metrics of productivity, of optimization, of success. I made a bit of reference to that. Evelyn Wan reminds us that all technologies are tie us to capitalist time, and and these limited parameters of time consciousness. So, but there are technologies that are capable of operating across very different scales of time, such as this 1,000-year-long composition by Jem Feiner, and the piece that his daughter wrote in collaboration with him about how to negotiate and find ourselves within 1,000 years of time. Technologies that favor care, that favor plurality, embodiment, reciprocity. This is the piece that Rolando wrote, who I mentioned earlier, co-wrote. Conviviality and restored connections with one another, as well as with the earth with a capital E. Technologies that are no longer rooted exclusively or almost exclusively in Western epistemologies, knowledge systems. In normative, let's say, also Western epistemologies. I did actually also forget to mention that as you see these slides on the title page these are the spreads of the title pages of each contribution, there's a list of words. These are words that I drew from each of the contributions and then assembled in a kind of a way that gestured toward what the contents are for each. So again, as they go by, if you bring your eyes to them, to alight on thinking through building scaffolding, threading together ancestors, songlines, sovereignty, dreams, textures of contact, and so on. Here are the artist Suzanne Keit's, Dr. Keit by now, her instructions for developing an AI based on ethical principles, developing AI in a good way based on the principles of Lakota culture and ways of being. These are Oscar Santillan's imaginative explorations of ancient technologies, ancient technological knowledge rooted in the Andes. This is from a project he did with curator Alessandra Troncone called The Andean Information Age. This too, one of the artifacts of that. Reimagining or using the quipu as a source of inspiration and imagining into the future. Oh yes, right, of course. And even decentering the human altogether. So the piece that Oscar wrote is about feeling into, not just feeling into, but also using artificial intelligences to sort of to connect with certain embodiments of the earth herself. This one by Mashinka Furens Hakopian. Attunement ruptures entangled lineages, what came before. Sharing wisdom, disrupting cartographies, saying no. Time portals, spaces of visibility, embodied transmissions, human and non-human, other futures. Reminding us and making visible the spectral presences and the histories that have shaped who we are and that are continuing to shape us and will shape our technological future. I meant to show this one first. With her project Phonosofia, Camilla Sposacci is inviting us to listen to the earth and all that it has witnessed. These are musical instruments. Inviting other energies and other intelligences into dialogue. And then in writing the book and in the book coming together, what stood out so much for me goes back to what I was saying about technology being material. The bodies that are present in this work, I write about that, the human bodies, the non-human bodies, the bodies of the earth I just referred to. Silvia Federici writes in Praise of the Dancing Body about the body as a receptacle of powers, the body also as a site of resistance, one that cannot easily be pinned down, extracted from, instrumentalized. And Gleb's My Broda, exploring forms of knowledge that emerge through touch, rhythm, listening, material engagement, and asking how embodied forms of intelligence and agency could re-enter our technological systems. Tension, flow, machine enactments, tactile wisdom, inward process, generative movement, unlearning. This is another one talking about dancing bodies, in this case, the aging body, with a specific focus on the Buto dancer Kazuo Ono. And it calls to mind a contribution to our last, The Slow Spatial Reader, our last book, that was about atypical bodies, about the unique affordances and the unique knowledges and ways of being that we can learn from atypical or otherly abled bodies. And there's a contribution in this book also that touches on that. Florence Okoye is writing about stories from the African continent from centuries ago where so-called disabled bodies or otherly abled bodies were not seen as liabilities but as a kind of superpower. And then the technologies that were developed to assist them, what we now call assisted technologies, actually rendered them in the eyes of the society as these kind of very powerful cyborg figures. And then the unique dimensions as well of bodies beyond the human. So Michael Marder, who's a philosopher of plants in particular, wrote this beautiful piece about the techniques and technologies of vegetality, their forms of intelligence, of communication, of adaptation, of relation, how plants are implicated in, most everything kind of around us and that we engage with on a daily basis. And just relating in a way to this filling feeling, I had to think about this this talk that Amitav Ghosh, the writer, gave. I watched online during COVID, where he said, as soon as you take the non-human seriously, the idea of history as a documentary record completely crumbles. And with this, he's talking about the non-human, also those humans who at some point were considered not to be human. You have to allow for views that do not produce records. So it's this tension between filling, feeling, how do we fill in the records? We do know with regard to other than human species, of course, that machines these days are actually, that artificial intelligence, machine learning is itself beginning to help reveal kind of previously unknown or beyond our reach dimensions of other than human life. And there's another contribution I don't have a slide about by the data scientist Siobhan K. Cronin, and she's talking about her studies of the kinetics of water in the ocean and the powers of propulsion of marine bodies, whales in particular, the kind of the geometries actually of their migration routes, the geometries even of their breath that is being discovered, and how these, in her words, she's imagining a bouquet of fascinating new algorithms that stand to expand the horizons of computer science. So I'm getting to the end. I've got 2 minutes. Last but not least, besides this book, in 2020, since 2020, I've hosted this podcast, AI Murmurings. I have speculative conversations with artists and in a couple of instances with curators discussing the work of artists that are no longer with us. But the conversations are about what machines might learn from their particular ways of thinking and of practicing. And these conversations as well are tools for shaping divergent futures. Sorry, there were some images relating to these. Does anyone know this object, Tipu's tiger? Monica Narula from Rux Media Collective brought this to my attention. It's from the 1780s. It's an animatronic musical instrument from India by the Sultan Tipu, and it shows a tiger mauling a British soldier. It's just, and it plays music as it's doing it. It's growling and playing music. Maria Hasabi, Stillness, Pia Lindman, who also contribute to the book, Robotic Embodiments. These were both from Tanya Kandiani about language and about this, actually how much early science was very much based in kind of these marvelous conceptions. Margaret Widmer, the last one I interviewed. And Heidi Bucher, we are celebrating her cyborg centennial this year with a little bit of funding from the Stimuleringsfonds to explore how her skinning actions in the 70s and 80s were actually, that she was actually a kind of a metaverse designer. And with the agreement of her 2 sons who run her estate, that she is in fact a kind of a cyborg of her time and continues to live on as such. Well, I was going to talk about the cyborg, but I've come to the end. I just had to evoke this. The cyborg has come back in several of the conversations on our podcast, and this painting, of course, by Lynn Randolph, which was created in 1989, to me continues to sum up. It was created in dialogue with Donna Haraway after she published her Manifesto of Cyborgs, Cyborg Manifesto. And it's what she writes about it, Lynn Randolph, is that how the cyborg could contain incompatible truths. Anyway, I don't want to go over time, so I had some things to say about it. But Donna Haraway herself responded to this image and says, this person is resonating with local and global conversations built into the skeleton of the Earth and its galaxy in the late 20th century. In this painting, she embodies the oxymoron of woman, third world person, human organism, communications technology, mathematician, writer, worker, engineer, scientist, spiritual guide, lover of the Earth. This image has resonated. These are 2 white women in dialogue generating these images, so I'm cognizant of that, but it still is evocative to me of what, compare this image again to the technological present and the way we think about this, about big tech and the very limited range of subjectivities and knowledge systems that are that have been running them, and think about the possibilities for the divergent and much more expansive, much slower, I would say, futures that are ahead of us. So this is something about Slow Research Lab. I invite you as well to join us in this space, yeah, that meaning as you explore our book, the way to think about the way being and a way new technological futures can unfold through encounter, through attention, through participation, through relation. This is how divergent futures begin to unfold. And please join us in the conversation, ask some questions when we're done. I'd really enjoy that. And then pay attention over the next days if anything in this talk has kind of sparked any interest, if you pick up the book or listen to the podcast or anything else. What opens up, in you? What is starting to kind of unfold in you through this? How might it then continue be enfolded within you and unfold in your thinking, in your own practice, and in your own technological future? Thank you.
What is starting to unfold within you? I think it's really a beautiful prompt. And thank you for allowing us to spend time also with the reader and to really animate what slow tech might kind of look like, entail. I think our second speaker situates a little bit this vision of slow tech, provides evidence of slow tech. Katažyna Jankovska, who has a book that is also being sold outside called Off Grid, which collects stories of self-organized protest infrastructures in Belarus, improvised internet networks between apartment blocks in Romania, DIY repair cultures in post-socialist contexts, autonomous art spaces, a self-sustaining research capsule designed to operate in isolation, and ambitious attempts to build technologies completely from scratch. So there's plenty of evidence. Now, Katažyna is a curator, writer, researcher based between Rotterdam and Vilnius. Her practice focuses on ever-evolving relationships between humans, machines, and natural systems, with a particular interest in experimental art forms exposing sensory perception, digital culture, and the influence of technology on contemporary society. Big round of applause.
Hi everyone, thanks Abdo for introduction, and thanks for having me and for such an inspiring talk, Carolyn. Today I want to share with you my current research that resulted in a publication called Off Grid that I developed together with V2 Lab for Unstable Media in Rotterdam. And it's actually, I think I thought about a lot of different questions that Carolyn just brought up, so it's interesting how they're gonna relate. So back in 2024, I went to this off-grid camp organized by UMEDEA Media Art Festival in Lithuania. And it wasn't completely off-grid, but it was a group of artists and curators living together for a few days, picking mushrooms, going to the sauna, cooking together, making bonfire, making sculptures from hay, digging clay, and just thinking of different ways of different formats of sharing and creating media art without the main component that powers it, which is electricity. So using all these different old media forms like language, water, fire. And so while working with media art myself the most, I started thinking how much those practices are dependent on these centralized systems of electricity, supply chains, servers, big tech, rare minerals, and all of them, they are often tied to extractive colonial systems. And also the systems or infrastructure that we use every day, like the systems that provide us water or communication and commodities, they often work in a way that it's somehow invisible, that we just expect them to be there as we expect the sun to rise every day. But they're grounded in a very material system. And when it breaks, we see what we actually depend on. And there was this exhibition in 2023 at the National Gallery of Art in Vilnius, curated by Antonija Stebur and Alexei Borisyanek, who called If Disrupted, It Becomes Tangible. And so basically they looked at breakdown, at disruption as a thing that shows how infrastructure is organized, how it works, and what we depend on. And so, for instance, internet is a good example. We rarely think about it as a material thing. We might think of a router in our room as a only tangible thing. We use words like cloud, something that is not material. But essentially, it's a complex system of things, of big things that operate somewhere out of sight. And there was this funny story, maybe some of you will know it already, that happened in 2011 in Georgia, where a 75-year-old woman, while scavenging for copper, she accidentally cut with a shovel through the fiber optic cable, and she left the neighboring country of Armenia without internet. And so it was a 600-kilometer cable running along the railway tracks in Georgia, providing 90% of Armenia's internet. And that's a funny thing, that when the woman was arrested and she was released later, she allegedly told reporters that I have no idea what the internet is. So this story sounds almost absurd, but in a world where a single point of failure can throw everything into chaos, this dependency on things felt like something to think about. And especially now with like multiple ongoing wars where infrastructure is targeted, blackouts happening in very different parts of the world, it felt like an urgent question to think about. And then I thought myself, like, what am I gonna do if things stop operating? You know, I don't know how electricity comes to my house. I don't know how internet works. I don't know how technologies are made, like the ones that I use every day, like a mobile phone, you know? It's like, it's not meant to be open. And then I remember when I was a kid, I loved watching this Canadian TV show called How It's Made. Maybe some of you also seen it. Where they show the manufacturing process of everyday items, from like pencils to bottles, so any of that. And then it, on one hand, kind of demystified the process, how things are done. But on the other hand, it also showed how complex those processes are. But then, when things break down and with their scarcity of available materials, I realized that they also generate different kind of effects. There is a rise of counter-infrastructures or DIY practices or improvised solutions or just collective ways of doing and being. And so in the same year that I went to this off-grid camp, I met with my Brazilian friend who told me about gambiarra. Maybe some of you are also familiar with the term. Which is basically a term that describes this culture of just repairing and doing things with what you have at hand, with the available materials that you have at hand. And so if you Google gambiarra, sorry for the low quality photos, there was no other, but you basically see everyday items used for like thousands of different purposes. And this kind of thinking and mentality can be found in different parts of the world. There is Jugaad in India, in parts of Pakistan, in parts of Africa, where they assemble low-cost vehicles. There is a number 8 wire in New Zealand, where they use a fencing wire for 1,000 different purposes. And although there is no universal term for post-socialist countries, like Lithuania, where I'm from, this mentality of doing things yourself, it's very much still is present there. And especially after the fall of Soviet Union, there was lack of access to manufactured goods, so people were just doing things with their own hands. And there were generations that were just living with manuals how to build, repair, modify things. And I remember it from my own childhood, you know, how we were just like saving all the screws possible in the house just in case we'll need it. And while I was preparing for this presentation, I just noticed 2 things that are quite funny to represent how it still is in my own life. So on the left, it was my mom's partner was installing a washing machine on my grandma's house. And it was some kind of problem to connect the pipe from the washing machine to the main pipe. So he made this temporary solution of attaching something heavy to it and putting it in the sink so the water can flow. Later, he found a way to do it, so it works now well. And on the right, it's me and my grandma playing checkers, but we lost the actual one, so my grandma was just collecting the bottle caps. So basically, with this in mind, I looked kind of largely, although not exclusively, at Eastern Europe and at different practices that emerge out of necessity and are defined somehow by this self-resilience and collective action. And I think it also relates to the inspiration that Fiber Festival this year had from Dean Spade. And there was a quote saying, as governments fail to respond or actively engineer each crisis, ordinary people are finding bold and innovative ways to share resources and support the vulnerable. And so, similarly to that, I was just talking with different curators or cultural practitioners from different countries about the initiatives that they built out of necessity. And these examples, they also relate well to the concept of infrastructural art by Antonina Stebur, where she describes practices that do not only represent or critique some kind of systems, but they also create alternative systems to that. And so she describes 3 different kinds of that, which is invasive, fugitive, and counter-infrastructures. So invasive are the systems that work within the existing systems and try to kind of rewire them from inside. Fugitive are more temporary, more fragile, that just emerge in response to some kind of crisis. And counter-infrastructures are more stable, alternative ways of doing and being and organizing next to the existing ones. And so from my initial question, when I went to this off-grid camp and thought about how would I create media art of grid, I went to this way broader thinking of different ways of people self-organizing and disseminating knowledge and just doing things together. And I gather here different examples that they do not try to answer like a lot of questions or give some kind of doomsday surviving scenario or how to live off grid. It's more like a curious exploration of practices that range from more infrastructural things like buildings and galleries to more temporary self-organized initiatives. So I started from the most obvious dependency that we have, which is electricity. And I looked at Iwerk in Luckenwalde, which is a regenerative power station and an art space that generates renewable electricity. And it's a building from 1913 that it's a brown coal power station that used to power the city of Luckenwalde and then in Germany. And it was dismissed after the fall of Berlin Wall. And basically, artist Pablo Wendel and curator Helen Turner, they repurposed this building into an art space. And they checked every bolt and put all the chain grinds back to motion with the help of former workers that used to work there. And now this building runs on 100% CO2 neutral energy, where they're using wood waste from neighboring forests. This is the engine room. And so basically this way they are, of course, heating the space, which is a massive 10,000 square meter space. But also they're selling the surplus to the national grid, and they call it Kunststrom, which translates to art power. And anyone that uses the energy or is a client of Kunststrom, they just like support the art program, and all the revenue goes to the art program. What is interesting about this building that at the entrance there is this stained glass window with a fist emitting light bulbs, and there's a light bulb in every niche, and it also represents that contrary to today's omnipresence of electricity, back then it was something more magic and unique and almost occult. I also looked at protests in Belarus that happened in 2020, after the rigged presidential elections, people went on the streets, which resulted in the biggest mass protests in country's history. And during the protests, a lot of decentralized grassroots resistance strategies were born and exist to this day. People started gathering in the neighborhood yards, started talking, like chatting over Telegram chats, which due to their encrypted messaging were the primary tool of communication. And an interesting example that Antonina shared with me was Museum of Stones, which is an initiative by a group of arts, cultural workers. And it was a kind of a neighborhood magazine. So when there were internet shutdowns during the protests, and these magazines, they were part offline, partly online, that you could download them, print them, and distribute them in the neighborhood, in the cafes. And they provided more radical content, or maybe sharing voices from marginal communities, basically as an alternative to the TV propaganda that was shown on TV. So people who didn't have internet access and had only propaganda on TV could stay somehow informed on things that going on. And in this spread, it's interesting that they're showing the neighborhood block and different like self-organized functions that emerged there. So there is a kindergarten that happened to be in one of the empty apartments. There is an improvised beauty salon. There are legal consultations. There are therapy sessions, yoga sessions. So people just created those infrastructures to help each other. And talking about the neighborhood blocks, I also included a work by Romanian artist Cristina Cochior. It's called Block Networks, and it looks at this already disappearing phenomena in Romania, where at the late 90s, beginning of 2000s, there was lack of internet infrastructure in the country. And so small providers that used to live in the neighborhood areas, they would provide internet to the neighbors. So they would just go across the balconies and string the internet cables across balconies from apartment to apartment. Often we're also using like a 5-liter bottle to shield the antenna from the rain, so very DIY solution. And this way, they would create this decentralized, often very cheap internet network that would serve like few hundred people. And now, all these neighborhood networks are acquired by larger companies, and all these overhead cables are also gone from the cities. And but although now the larger providers dominate, it was especially exactly those people that created the foundation for a country's internet infrastructure. And but when talking about DIY, it's of course important to think about the difference between DIY by choice and DIY by necessity, because there are parts of the world that never had stable infrastructure, and in different parts of the world where it was stable, it becomes to be shaky and crumbling. So that their DIY can be also a form of preparedness. And I spoke with Garnet Hertz. He's an artist and a professor and author of the book Art Plus DIY Electronics. And with him, we also spoke about this maybe less positive side of DIY, that it can be also very inefficient, it can be very time-consuming, and if you try to compete with a factory, you probably will gonna lose. And it can be also disorienting, you know, trying to falling into this idea of self-sufficiency. And I included this artwork that I like a lot. It's an artwork by Thomas Twites, where he came up with this very ambitious idea of building a toaster from scratch. So he bought the cheapest toaster he could find in a store that costed him £4. And he decided to make it himself, self-sourcing all the materials and using only domestic equipment to produce it. And so he disassembled the toaster into 157 parts, thinking how difficult can it be to build something that is so cheap, so easily accessible, and so easily discarded after as a toaster. So he went on a journey to the no longer operational iron mine in England to get some iron from there. But of course he didn't get to mine it, but he got some from display. And so he came back home with a suitcase, 40 kilogram suitcase of iron ore. Then after like many unsuccessful attempts of turning into an actual iron, he read the book from 16th century on metallurgy. So basically that's where our knowledge of doing things ourselves can be still done from 16th century. And then eventually he made some iron in a microwave. Then he went to Scotland to get some mica for insulation from the rocks. And then he wanted to make plastic himself, so here he's pouring melted plastic, I guess, into the case to make a toaster case. Yeah. So that was the result. And yeah, such a simple thing as a toaster turned out to have a very complex supply chain, that it's something that is digged out of the ground, turned into different material, assembled together, packed, distributed, and then turned on by another invisible chain of things that gives electricity. And so this thing costed him actually 250 times more than the actual toaster. You can see the price there is like over £1,000. And eventually he didn't turn it on into a socket, but he did turn it into the batteries, because he was, of course, afraid for his safety. And so the toaster, it got warm. It was not hot enough to toast the bread, but it was warm enough to prove that it worked. But in general, it was just an example of how impossible it is actually to be self-sufficient and do things completely from scratch. And then also I was curious to think about how, coming back to this more curatorial thing and how to organize exhibitions without relying on electricity or sockets or gallery walls or urban infrastructure. I looked at this example in Estonia called Mayam, which translates to Earth Station. And it's an family-run art space in a farm. And they initiated this exhibition called Wild Bits, which is a 3-kilometer curated path of technological artworks that goes through farmlands and forests and swamps all across the Mayam. And it's an interesting thing because basically all the works that they are presenting, they need to withstand all weather conditions. Most of them incorporate those into the artwork, so they change based on wind or sun or shade, like this, trees. But it's also a completely different mentality of how to curate things, right? Like you have to let go of control or any predictability. You need to work in collaboration with nature. You need to understand the land that is around you. You need to think of wild animals, harsh weather, everything that can impact the artwork that is just in the middle of this open field. So I found it an interesting example how it's completely different mindset to this control and efficiency and all of what we were talking about today. And although Mayam is not completely off-grid, the experimental station for research on art and life is. It is a space in Romania, 40 kilometers outside of Bucharest, and it's a piece of land that is owned and co-managed by a group of art workers who are trying to test different future climate scenarios there, so drought, heat, and cold, and so they had to do everything from scratch there. They had to dig their own water, put some solar panels that is powering just the water pump and some essential things. So also thinking like there's not the resources they have, and water is not endless. And so they planted different, like 80 different plant species to see which ones would adapt For instance, this winter was super harsh winter there, so which species would survive. Then they made an oven as a gathering space. They have a glass house. Essentially just exploring this very slow technology life. But what's interesting about it that when I talked with them and I asked them what they wish they knew before starting this project, they said that because they started in 2020 during COVID, they were hoping that things will change for the best. So, and very quickly we went back to wars and extractivism and all these things. And they say that although going off grid doesn't sound as an experiment anymore, it feels that it's something that we will actually need to do at some point. It also feels very insufficient and inefficient compared to the big scale of things. That's one more photo. And so I want to end with a project that explores this idea of complete self-sufficiency. And it's an artwork by Marko Peljan, a Slovenian artist, called Macrolab. And it's a 10-year research project where he decided to make an autonomous capsule that, with an idea that it would survive anywhere. So it would be just assembled and disassembled, and it would just can survive in the most remote parts of the world without any external help or dependency. So food can be grown there. They had all the radio equipment for research. And the first thing was shown at Kassel in Documenta 10 in '97. And then afterwards, it was traveling all around the world, across different continents, and it hosted more than 100 researchers that were called macronauts. And it's interesting that the idea, how this project came to life, it was Marko, his colleague, walking on the island of Krk in Croatia, looking for a space for a performance, and they found a sign saying "Way to the Moon." And so they followed the sign, and they found a place that was called the Moon. And it was a very kind of desolated place without any vegetation, with very strong wind that apparently resembled the moon. But then they heard some sounds that resembled the thunderstorm, but it was actually the artillery explosions from the war in Bosnia going close by. And so there he thought of this: is it possible to somehow completely hide away from and survive these kind of things? And when I was in touch with them again, because it was a project that happened more than 20 years ago, they said that these kind of topics are unfortunately getting urgent again. So yeah, with this in mind, all these projects, they somehow prove that complete autonomy is not possible. They maybe are very relative in their autonomy, but I think they show what kind of room for maneuver still exists, or at least they show how locked in certain systems we are and how difficult it would be to actually be off-grid in whatever sense we're thinking of. Like doing DIY, you still do not do it from scratch. But it somehow gave me hope that people do come with solutions in times of crisis. They do create, especially collectively, different ways of responding to the crisis when the state or the bigger things are absent. And they are often fragile and temporary, but they still offer this kind of support to each other. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I want to invite you to the stage again for a conversation, Carolyn as well. I love how for both your talks we have written evidence, we have proof, we have books that we can fall back into so we can spend even more time. We have 10 minutes for conversation. And I actually want to ask you, I think there's a very fine line, there's a nuance that I think both of you are walking through. And that is really the idea of slow technology as this kind of romanticized alternative to us feeling trapped by kind of more large-scale technologies. How do we avoid this romanticization and really reposition slow tech as a viable, urgent alternative? That is a question. Maybe for Caroline first.
I don't think there's anything romantic about it.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely essential. And we focus on creative practice, as I said, and creative practitioners, because, I mean, as we saw from the 16th century, Athanasius Kirchner, you know, these kind of inventors who were working with all kinds of fantastical kind of ideas and inventions they were, and working really like pouring their imagination into the gaps in knowledge, which were so huge at the time. And then the inventions, you know, and the technologies that were actually eventually born of those things. So there's an urgency time-wise, of course, but we have to, you know, we are complicit. There are so many more of us than there are of them, right? So it's our complicity in these systems also that is, you know, that is perpetuating them. And I think it's really essential, you know, as I said, it's not, I mean, I'm glad that I come from a time before the phone, so that I can actually like leave my phone at home for a day and I don't,
you don't
it's
feel
all
like,
right.
oh yeah, you've done something radical by doing
I mean,
so.
although I did leave it at home when I came here and I had to go back because I had all my notes on the phone, but But no, but it's just to say that there are, you know, we're living in this time now where you go anywhere and everybody's heads are down, right? And we have to look up at each other. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of thinking about it. But as you said, you know, I had to think during your talk about this. There's a piece by Claudio Bueno and Moises Patricio in the book about the social technologies of candomblé in Brazil. The name of the piece is Eshu and Living Earth. Eshu is the Yoruba spirit of the crossroads, and they're writing about the crossroads that we are at. And Claudio, who's now based in California, UC Santa Cruz, is imagining. I just would love to if you would indulge me. I just looked up the page number so I could read it. He says, there's a certain pleasure in imagining the possible fragility of the big techs of Silicon Valley, one of the largest economies in the world, exploiting lands all over the world, sitting on countless geographical faults, collapsing in the face of an unpredictable response from the earth itself, or let's say herself. Yeah. So they're talking about returning to these what are the basic like social technologies of care and repair and, you know, not just the material things, but how do we live together and support one another. So the breakdown of the social fabric that's also accelerated by these things is very serious, but we have the ability to restore those.
No, I love how you also position grief in relationship, because the more we gain the conveniences of the technologies, the more we lose kind of the older technologies that we have, and we have to deal with it. And I think for Katažyna, you also have this idea of there is alternatives possible, but they're not complete, they're imperfect, and you're learning that as you go. But you said it also still gives you hope somehow. So can you tell us a little bit more about how is this hope kind of animated by the inevitability of the systems failing that we're using now, but also the fragile alternative of like off-grid technologies? How do we?
Yeah, I think like here in Western Europe, where it just so quickly got used to everything working so seamlessly and invisibly, and nothing is breaking, everything works well, that we don't even know like what to do when things break. And I mean, that was intentional, right? Like this security through obscurity, that's all these things are intentionally obscured. It's like we, for a reason, don't know how they work, so we cannot disrupt it, we cannot contest it, right? But then I think in all these different parts of the world, that is not the case, you know? They do live with this failing infrastructure up until this day, all this time, you know? And and they just figure out how to do it, you know? So I think we do need to learn from them, because this slow technology that we try to maybe find now, like they have it inherently in their mindset, I think, you know, like the same Gambiara thing. I think it's inherently slow technology, because they were just, they had to find a way to make it work. So I do think that we do need to turn to these kind of practices and just learn from them, instead of just going for more efficiency and more optimization and all these things.
I think maybe my next question is more about mutual relationships, right? Because again, I do have this idea, this assumption is that we'll have to give up a lot, right? To be truly slow in our consumption of technology, in our creation of technology. But I think you particularly had an example where there was kind of an exchange that you can even sell some of the technology, the power that you've generated using this mechanism. How can we cultivate more mutual relationships of interdependence that don't feel like we're just doing what we were doing before but less, you know? How can it be kind of more of a constructive process?
I think the community is the foundation of sustainability and everything, you know, this idea of sharing, repairing, like you cannot just depend on yourself. It's not possible, I think.
Yeah.
So all these practices that I mentioned, I think they all had the community aspect on them. Is it either, like an example from Belarus, those people were not talking to each other before the protests, so they didn't know each other, and then this thing happened, and they had to kind of gain mutual trust and gather in the neighborhoods, you know, so that brought them together. Or the Romanian networks, you know, it was just people helping each other in the neighborhood block. So I think without it, it's just not possible, right?
I think yesterday we also had, from Dean Spade, we had this imperative where like, how do we have mutual aid with each other? And the answer was to steal, right? To learn how to steal in a way that is communal. And now in connection to that, I think of, in Egypt there's a very common, like densely populated areas. A lot of them like to watch football, for example. And what often happens is that there's one cable that is like an expensive subscription, and the people kind of, they have branches of this cable, and you have the whole neighborhood watching the same TV channel that is like paywalled usually. And that is a form, I think, of being able to be a little bit more like nifty with the way that you operate. I'm wondering if there's any questions from the audience, because I don't think we have so much time. Quiet audience. There's a question back there.
Check. Hi, thanks for the very nice talks, both of you. I was wondering if you're familiar with the concepts of some tech bros called DAC, which is decentralized or defensive or democratized accelerationism, and it was, I think, pinned down by Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum, and his idea is a little bit to accelerate indeed technology to reap the benefits of it, but develop it in a way that is resilient to value extraction, is resilient to centralization and power grabbing, and obviously also sustainable with the rest of the planet. I was wondering if you knew about this and what your opinions are of that. In some way,
I have heard something about this, but how exactly does it work? It's about accelerating things until they break?
No, the concept is, I think his idea is really that we can reap benefits of technology, and it does benefit us, and I think, you know, in some way we've seen this throughout civilization, right? The room we're in, the world we live in, with all the costs that it had, and the idea is how do we make sure that the technology that we develop cannot be subverted to harm people, is developed in a way that doesn't harm the planet, and that, again, doesn't allow value extraction so that it can really be for the benefit of the people. I feel like sometimes there's maybe worlds that are researching similar topics with very, very different perspective. These would be two, but not necessarily colliding. And I guess the question was
Okay. Is it kind of like slow by design technology almost?
it's not slow.
It's not.
I think on
Yeah.
the contrary, it's fast, but fast with intentions and
Okay.
with
But I mean, the
carefulness.
intentions can be like I've heard. I don't know if it was Zuckerberg or one of those guys talking. It was probably what's his name? Anyway, talking about we will have, because of AI, we will have desalination, technologies that will give fresh water to everyone in the world. So because of this, I mean, is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Because this is where we're going, this is the direction that we're going in, that we have to kind of, it's another reason that's given to kind of get on the bandwagon of the vision that big tech has for us, and it's one of the visions that ultimately this will, and there are examples like the one I gave from Siobhan Krona, the Danish scientist who's looking at, she actually left me a voice note the other day saying like, we're discovering that these, like the geometries of these bubbles that are coming out when whales are breathing are actually something that are similar to the vibrations that the resonant vibrations, frequencies they're using to target like cancer cells in the liver, like that there are these kind of, so of course there are these these technologies are also delivering, incredible advancements. I would not say that they're for the whole world or that they've ever proven themselves to be. They are for certain people that live in certain kinds of countries or certain societies. So the prospect of delivering that, there's always been this prospect of delivering, food and water and things too, and actually the technologies exist to do that, in fact, now. So I just think there are often these mechanisms that are used to say, yeah, there's all this, it's like the move fast and break things ethos, which I talk about in the book and which I referred to with move slow and heal things, is the idea that like, we're gonna break a lot of things a lot in the way, but we're gonna get like to this incredible like utopia. And I find it ironic that the fear that a lot of people in tech have about that AI destroying humanity, I mean, that would be the logical conclusion, wouldn't it, of these machines, if you look at what humanity is doing to the earth? I mean, so it's just, there's a funny tension for me between those things.